So this text, the author of the text had done practice or cultivation of bodhicitta thoroughly, and as is said in the 8 verses of training the mind, whenever I'm associated with someone, may I look upon myself as the lowest, and so forth. So Shantideva was such a person, such a practitioner who didn't look for any reward for his practices, but rather he showed humility all the time. Even in this text, the next verse shows that. Or else, as we usually explain the verse of homage in Pramana Vartika by Dharmakirti, here also we can say that on the immediate level, the author Shantideva is saying there is nothing here that has not been explained before. For someone who wishes to hear a lot of teachings, so that they would be able to say, I have received this teaching and this text and that text, so forth, just going on counting how many teachings they have received. For them, perhaps when they hear that I'm giving this teaching on Bodhisattva Charyavatara, they may say, I have heard this before. But merely, if your intention is merely to listen to some teaching and nothing more than that, then there is not much purpose for coming or listening to the teaching of Shantideva. But on the other hand, as it is usually said that one should not rely on the person, but the teaching. But within the teaching, one should not rely on just the words, but the meaning. And so if you are someone who relies just on the words, like how poetic a certain writing is and so forth, then perhaps Shantideva is saying here, and I have no skill in the art of composition. And with people who come with such intention, therefore he says, therefore lacking any intention to benefit others who have such very short-term goals. I write this in order to appoint it to my mind, such as acquainting my mind to the 6 perfections, practice of the 6 perfections, and so forth. So for such a person whose intention is to transform their minds more and more, the more they hear the teaching, the better. So although nothing here is new that has not been explained before, but for someone whose intention is to acquaint their mind, to transform their mind, this text has a meaning, it is significant. And he also says that someone who is just looking for poetical beauty of the text, it is not meant for such a person, but someone who is looking for the real essence or the meaning of the teaching. For such a person, this teaching is beneficial. And so in relation to the other for whom this teaching is meant, it has a benefit in that way. Even if you may listen to one teaching over and over again, what purpose is there to do that, to listen to teaching over and over again? He says, for due to acquaintance with what is wholesome, the force of my faith may for a short while increase because of these words. So now Shantideva is saying that in order to write down what he had in his mind, so that he would be able to acquaint with the meanings more and more. Because what is known as a virtuous or wholesome action is something which gives rise to a pleasant experience as a result. So, whether you call some actions negative or positive is mainly related to your intention, your motivation. And so a certain action related with certain motivation becomes negative or positive. And there is also the virtuous or positive actions of body, speech, and mind. Although physically you may be doing something virtuous, but if you did not have the intention to do so, but your mind is just like neutral. For example, if you do some prostration, physically you may be doing the prostration, but if you do it just as like an exercise or sport, then your mind is more or less neutral. And on the other hand, if you pretend to be doing something virtuous, thinking that if you did that, then others would see you doing them and would be praising you and giving you rewards, money and so forth, then your motivation is wrong. And even if the action seems to be right, but positive, but then because of the motivation, the wrong motivation, it becomes really wrong action. And so the mind's nature is such that if you acquaint with something more and more, it'll become easier and easier. You get habituated with it. If you think something over and over again, then the force of your mind will grow more and more powerful with regard to that. So positive and negative actions do not occur to us like automatically. We are more or less beset with ignorance, and because of which we have love and hatred, or attachment and hatred, which come rather more automatically to us. So far what we have been doing is taken these negative emotions, attachment, lust, or greed, and anger, hatred, and so forth, for granted. We have taken them rather as natural part of our mind or something like that. And we do not see the fault of these negative actions, of negative thoughts and emotions. The real enemy is within us, which actually gives us suffering, which is the undisciplined mind. So you have peace when your mind is disciplined, controlled, and when you have suffering when your mind is undisciplined. And therefore, in our texts, the definition of negative emotions or afflictive emotions is given as that experience no sooner when it arises in our minds disturbs our peace of mind. And therefore, these negative emotions make us unhappy. So there is, of course, within the mind, the primary mind, and then the others, which are called secondary or mental events. So there is in Buddhist psychology, these different various types of negative emotions are explained and described. And so that we can see which are the good ones that can benefit us and which are bad ones that harm us, like picking the different herbs and distinguishing between which are the good ones and which are bad ones and so forth. So it is very difficult for us to try to find happiness based on some external phenomena alone, because happiness, whether you're happy or unhappy, the source of these two are within ourselves, our mind. So it's not the material things which produce the happiness or unhappy mind states. So just as we make distinction between what are helpful to us and take them, and what are harmful to us and discard them, likewise the states of mind which are helpful to us, which bring us peace of mind, we have to take on them, and the destructive emotions like hate, anger, and hatred, and that of greed or attachment, we have to know these to be destructive, and these cannot go away. The destructive emotions will not go away just by praying that they may go away, but you have to apply the antidote, the counter force, which can eliminate them. If we had been able to overcome these merely through prayers, then we would have been able to done so a long time back. You cannot also rely on the blessings of the Buddhas alone. We would have been free from all these negative emotions if only they can be overcome through the blessing of the Buddha alone. So because we have faith in the Buddha, but what we have lacked is the effort to transform our mind, to discipline, to control the negative emotions, and increase the positive ones. We have lacked in our effort in doing that. And therefore, due to acquaintance with what is wholesome, shows that we have to transform our mind and accustom our minds to the virtuous practices. In China, the communist authorities are trying to educate what is known as like educate people through force, by using force, which will not be fruitful. So by using force, there will be more fear, and fear will never be able to. With fear, people will never be able to learn what they are supposed to learn. And therefore, what you have to see is the benefit of the positive things, positive states of mind, and the negativities or disadvantages of the negative states of mind. And therefore, by seeing these two, you have to be able to take up the ones which are beneficial to you and discard those which are disadvantages, which bring harm to you. And the force of my faith may for a short while increase because of these. So you will, of course, listen to the teaching, know more new information, learn more new information, and that will increase your knowledge. And so Shantideva is saying that there is some benefit to him for writing this. If, however, these words are seen by others equal in fortune to myself, it may be meaningful for them. Verse number 4. So verse number 4 shows the mental basis for the practice of the physical basis of the as a human person, having attained a human body, you have the advantage of listening to teaching and so forth, and then Verse number 5 shows that of the mental basis for listening to teachings or practicing the teachings. So with regard to bodhicitta, this altruistic intention to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, those disciples or followers with sharp intellect, as Shandarakshita writes in his auto-commentary, his own commentary on the Mulla Madhyamaka Alamkara. So those of the those disciples who have the lineage of the Mahayana have to first check whether the negative emotions can be overcome, can be eliminated, or completely overcome from the mind stream or not. And when doing that, they check whether what are the causes of these negative thoughts and emotions, and they find that that of the ignorance is the source of the rest of the negative thoughts and emotions. And so long as the state of mind is in the ignorant state, is in ignorance, then it is a distorted state of mind. And therefore, you have to overcome it with the knowledge that goes against it. It's like learning the alphabet, A, B, C, D. Well, in the beginning, you may be ignorant about them, but this ignorance has to be overcome by learning, by knowing the alphabet. And so it's a matter of whether you put effort in learning the alphabet or not. There is the means to overcome this ignorance ignorance about the alphabet. So the mind has the nature of knowing the alphabet, but because of not having been introduced to the alphabet, you may remain ignorant for a while. But because the deep potential is there to know the alphabet, and therefore you can overcome the ignorance about the alphabet. Whereas ignorance about the alphabet is mere ignorance. So once you know the alphabet, then you can acquaint your mind with these, and then there comes a time when you can actually read the alphabets without any effort. So as long as there is ignorance, there is always the counteracting factor for that which overcomes it. So within the ignorance, there is the mere ignorance, mere not knowing, unknowing of things, and there is the distorted knowledge. And so the distorted knowledge can be overcome by the knowledge of that thing. So the right knowledge that you gain through learning has always the support of reason and logic. And therefore, the distorted knowledge or distorted state of mind can be overcome. So even if somebody may be very angry type of person, but the person doesn't remain angry all the time, 24 hours. So that mere nature of the mind being that of luminosity and knowing or awareness shows that the mind, basic mind, is neutral. It's like a blank, a white sheet of cloth, which can be dyed white or dyed with colors. It can remain either white or colored with black or white. And so the basic mind is neutral. And therefore, due to certain conditions, you can experience love or affection, and due to other conditions, you can become angry. And so both of these can be your experience, but these two cannot happen at the same time. This shows that they are mutually exclusive with each other. So hatred, which is the state of mind where you wish to harm somebody, cannot go together with that of love or loving kindness. So the negative emotions happen because of, according to Madhyamaka philosophy, it comes from this viewing things or conceiving things to have some kind of independent or a true existence. And so the wisdom which realizes there being no independent existence or true existence of things goes against this kind of distorted view, which is the basis for the negative emotions. So this state of mind is a misconception about the reality. It holds on to the appearance and not the reality. So things appear to you as if it has some kind of a true existence from their side, but they do not actually have that kind of existence. But that we cling to that appearance, and therefore the reality is other than what appears to the true the grasping at true existence. And in the 9th chapter of this same text, it is said that all the Buddha's teachings of all the Buddhas are entirely based on the two truths, which are the worldly conventional truth and the ultimate truth. So the teachings of the Buddha are given on the basis of two truths, making distinction between the two truths. Of course, in the Pali tradition also there are the two truths are taught, but with regard to the explanation or interpretation of the two truths, there are differences between how the Vaibhashikas and Sautrantikas explain them, and how in the Mahayana tradition of the Chittamatras and the Madhyamakas explain them. But in other words, there are two things here to know: the appearance and the reality of things. So we have to use our analytical mind. For example, in order to know the subtle impermanence of things, you have to check about how things actually exist temporarily or momentarily. So, for example, you see the flowers growing and blossoming in the summer and the spring. The flowers grow, and then they mature or grow fully in the summer, and then when the autumn comes, then the plants die. And these changes are rather gross, which even the animals are aware. For example, in the summertime, there are lots of insects, and therefore the birds also, we see lots of birds as well. Whereas in the winter times, you don't see many of them because there's not much food as they get in the summer times. And so even the animals are aware of what they can obtain or not in different seasons. So you have to note that the changes that happen in a year cannot happen if the change has not happened each month. And the change in the month cannot happen without there being change each week. And you cannot have a change of change in a thing at the only abruptly at the end of the month. And so each week also you have days, and days have hours, and hours have the minutes, and minutes you can go down into the seconds and so forth. So change happen. So if you divide even a second to milliseconds and so forth, you can see that there is change every millisecond. So unless and until you, unless you examine and use some critical analysis of these changes happening at the atomic level and so forth, you will not be aware of them. So at the atomic level, things are always on the moving. So these are the subtle changes, subtle impermanence. And so what we have learned through the text for thousands of years about the subtle impermanence of things is these days very empirically proved. And so you have to know that we talk about the understanding or the knowledge of impermanence and not the faith in impermanence as such. We don't talk about a faith in impermanence, but the wisdom or the knowledge of impermanence. And so even within the conventional truth, you have the grosser level and the subtle level, like the grosser level of impermanence, which we can see the obvious changes happening with our senses, and then there is the subtle level of impermanence, which we can know by using our minds through examination and analysis. So leaving things as at the appearance level, we have the wish to overcome suffering and experience pain, pleasure. Sorry. And also we have the wish to reach enlightenment or attain enlightenment. And therefore, we also have the wish to attain Buddhahood. And also the compassion or the compassion towards others, to liberate others out of suffering. So with these two intentions, that of the intention to help others out of suffering, and then intention to become a Buddha for the benefit of all. So you have to see whether that in order to develop this, you have to check whether enlightenment, Buddhahood, is something which is possible to attain or not. So without understanding emptiness, you cannot actually prove or have the conviction that there is Buddhahood, that the possibility of Buddhahood. So for someone with sharp intellect, without the understanding of emptiness, one will not be convinced of attaining Buddhahood, which is the state of knowing everything and the freedom from all delusions, all negative thoughts and emotions and their stains. And therefore, by understanding, through understanding of emptiness, you can see that the defilements that we have, the delusions and so forth, can be overcome. And it can be, we can separate the mind from these delusions through the understanding of emptiness. Otherwise, it's difficult. And therefore, Shantarakshita is saying that understanding the ultimate nature of the things first, having the conviction of it first, this ignorance which holds on to the true existence of things, whereas there is no true existence of things, and therefore the world is thrown into this cycle through the ignorance. So all these bad views, like wrong views and the the view of transitory collection and grasping at the self and others. And so someone who is enveloped by these kind of bad views, so seeing others in that kind of condition, being enveloped by such bad views, and then on the other hand, seeing that there is a possibility to overcome those suffering which are brought by the ignorance and so forth, because there is an antidote to the cause of these suffering. Therefore, you become compassionate towards others who are enveloped by ignorance and so forth, and then you also, by knowing the the nature of enlightenment, and then how to attain it, and what are the different obstacles to it, and so forth. By knowing all these things, someone wise to develop or experience the bodhicitta with the intelligence, which is that of understanding of emptiness and compassion, by relying on the combined path of compassion and wisdom, they will engage in the practices of the bodhisattvas. So this is how someone with intellect, with sharp intellect, engages in the practice of cultivation of bodhicitta based on the understanding of emptiness. Whereas those with dull intellect or lesser intellect will follow follow Dharma based on their faith alone. So once there was a teacher in Tibet who was asked a question by a disciple, "What is Buddha?" And the teacher didn't have answer immediately and just sat there silent for a while, and then after that he said, "A Buddha is someone up there in the azure space, sitting rather elegantly." So I revisited last year the Lahore Spiti regions, and I met some Buddhists, some villagers in Lahore, and I asked, "What is Buddha? What is a Buddhist?" And they said, "Someone who takes refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha." And then I asked, "What is a Buddha?" And then they said they didn't know. And then I asked whether the Buddha and the Shiva and so forth, these gods who are believed as creators of the universe, are same or not, and they said yes, they are same. And so these show the ignorance about one's own tradition. So in order to know one's own tradition, you have to study them. So it doesn't help just to say that that you are a Buddhist and not really studying. It doesn't really help. So I usually say that we have to be 21st century Buddhists. And if you can do so through by gaining knowledge, by educating yourself about Buddhism, and then through based on your knowledge and reasoning, then you develop faith in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and so forth, taking refuge. Then you would be it would be good. Of course, throughout the centuries, we have had many great scholars of Buddhism. That I usually say that all who claim to be Buddhists have to be learned and then have good contact and warm heart. And therefore, for a Buddhist practitioner, it is very essential to use our intelligence through by using our intelligence and increasing our knowledge about Buddhism and doing our practice. So there are two different states of mind, which we can call them as wisdom on the one hand, and then the method or intentions on the other hand. So intention part has to be helped by the wisdom to increase, to further them. So animals, of course, cannot have this kind of intelligence to engage in Buddhist religious practices and so forth. But we, as have this human body. So in order to practice the Dharma, it is said here that we have to have a good human body as well. So as a condition. Blessing for the tea. Yeah. So leisure in endowment, verse number 4, leisure shows that you have the time to practice the Dharma, and then which shows that of the freedom from the unleisurely states or unfortunate births, the 8 different states, in other words, freedom from these. And then you have the conducive conditions. Endowment shows that of the conducive conditions to practice the Dharma, which are very hard to find, it says. So if you say that, of course, I want to practice Dhamma, but not now, but later. But in order to obtain such a leisurely state as a human being, you have to accumulate. You have to have accumulated lots of merit in the past, and avoid lots the engaging in the non-virtuous actions. So in our case, even in dreams, we tend to commit wrongdoings, and therefore it's difficult to find this kind of human body in the future as well. And since they accomplish what is meaningful for humanity, so you are born as a human person in this life, and you have all the organs, the faculties intact, without any defect, and then you have the Dharma, and you have the freedom to practice the Dharma, and there are texts which for the text of Dharma in Chinese and Tibetan. There are so many of them. And these days there are in other languages like English, German, French, Spanish, Italian. So the Dharma books are coming out in these different languages. More and more will come. Of course, in Romanian also you have the text. So the world has become smaller, and therefore there's quicker communication these days. places which remained rather isolated, remote in the past, are because of the information, the technology, the information can be shared very fast between peoples, and therefore the text will, of course, will be available. More and more text will be available for us. And then there is the Dharma teacher, the spiritual virtuous teacher, who show us what is right and what is wrong. And but unfortunately, in Tibetan, tulku system has become like is taken for granted, like a privilege. And these days we have tulkus without the qualification of Lama. But on the other hand, we have people who have really engaged in the study and and have reflected on the teaching, contemplated on them, and meditated and generated experience within themselves, truly. And there may not be reincarnated lamas or tulkus, but they are real masters. So I usually say that there are four alternatives between a tulku and a lama. There are those who are both. There are those who is one and not the other, A not the B, and B not the A, and then of course there are those who are neither. And from those who have come from Singapore and Malaysia and so forth, I usually tell them that it's important to check lamas, whether they have the qualifications, real qualifications for lamas or not. 20 or 30 years ago, I met one Chinese from the mainland, China, who told me that there are Tibetans coming to China proper from Tibet, who claim to be Dharma Rajas, king of Dharmas. And when the Chinese people themselves devoted to these people who claim to be Dharma Rajas, gradually they are found to have come to China for women and money. And so this person asked if I could do something about this. And I said, no, I cannot do anything about this. But in order to prevent such things in the future, you have to, first of all, learn what are the qualifications of a Lama whom you rely on. And so by knowing the different qualifications, and then when you find people who claim to be Dharma Rajas coming to India, first do not just jump at the person. As Satya Pandita has said, although the pleasures of this life are very temporary, people tend to jump to them easily and without. Satya Pandita is saying that whereas the pleasures of this life are very temporary, but then people tend to put so much effort in analyzing whether something would be beneficial or whether something is valuable or not, and so forth, and spend lots of time and money and so forth. Whereas the Dharma, which is meant for bringing happiness not only in this life but throughout the future lives, and ultimately to lead us to enlightenment, but when it comes to the Dharma, people just do not examine it properly and do not have much inspiration to check it. And therefore, it's important for us to check the Dharma. As Buddha himself has said, you should not look at the person, rely on the person, but the teaching, And within the teaching, not on the words, but the meaning. And within the meaning, not the provisional ones, but the definitive ones. And within the definitive ones, you do not go after the sensory perceptions, but the temporary experiences, but that of the wisdom experience. Although there may be people who are highly qualified, who may, because of certain reasons, teach in a certain way which may appear to be wrong, but you have to have pure vision or of the person, but check the teaching itself. As Chizong Kapa has said, having understood the nature of the teaching, may I generate faith in the Buddha. And so, even if you have to make some offering to someone who claims to be Dharmaraja, you may first make offering. If you have $100, you may offer 5 and keep the 95 with yourself, and then check the person further. And then, when you see that the person is really giving good teaching, but then after getting down from this throne, and when he's not teaching, is not really being practical about what he's teaching, then that shows not qualified. Whereas if you find the person to be acting what he teaches, doing what he teaches exactly, and you find them rather more and more convincing, then you may, in the end, eventually offer the $95 that you have in your pocket. And there was a very good Lama, His Holiness is trying to remember. He has said this. These days there are people who do business with Dharma. So they give teachings, and then they take the offerings. And he's Rangzhu, and he has said that he has given up taking any offerings for giving teachings to people. So if a Lama expects some offering from his disciples for teachings, then that's really committing negative action. And Buddha himself has taught about the 8 right living. So if you covet others' offerings or wealth by giving teaching, then that is like doing business with Dharma. So you have to teach Dharma to others with the sole intention to benefit them, and not expecting rewards, not expecting some offerings. And so there are people who do business with the Dharma. You have to be very careful, especially the Chinese people. There are people who come amongst you to give teaching. And when Dromtempa was about to pass away, one of his foremost disciples, Gadampa Master Geshe-Potowa, had Dromtempa's hat in his lap, and at that time, Geshe-Potowa felt very sad, and he shed tears, and his tears dropped on Dromtempa's face. And Dromtempa asked, "Why are you so sad? What is the reason?" And Potowa said, "Until now, we have relied on you. You are our Lama, and when you pass away, whom should I rely on? And he asked this with sadness in his heart. And Domtaba said, don't worry, you have learned the Dharma very well and thoroughly reflected and examined it, and therefore you can take the scriptures as your teacher. Lama Tsongkhapa has said that when it comes to studying text, you should not just take one text and just be satisfied with it, but you have to study many different texts. As Lama Tsongkhapa has said in Lamrim Chemo, you should not be satisfied with mere just a partial, scriptures, partial scriptures, or very rough meaning of scriptures and so forth, but you have to study all the different texts. So these days, with regard to historical accounts about certain teachings, we are not so much interested in the chronological order of the composition of text by such and such author, but Western scholars are very good at this. They say, this text was written by this author in such and such year and at such and such time and so forth. But for us, we cannot sometimes even say who the authors are, so where the text was written and so forth. But we have to study the text thoroughly, which doesn't mean that you study one text and just be satisfied with it and feel inspired by it and just be contented, but you have to look at different texts, such as studying the texts written by Asanga, and then how he is interpreted by Vasubandhu and Stiramati and so forth, and then study the text written by the Nagarjuna and his commentaries on his text by his disciples and so forth. And then you have to compare all these different texts and learn them. And so this is how you should go about with studying the texts. Otherwise, your knowledge may be rather partial. And Rinpoche also has said that these days those who claim to be yogis do not have much learning, but those who are learned do not know how to practice. And therefore, he has written this Lamrim Chemo for the being inspired by all the different masters' commentaries, which show how to go about with the practice. So even if you may have the intention or the desire to do practice, you do not know how to do it, the practice. Whereas even if you have lots of learning, and you can say, oh, such and such master, scholar has written this, said this, and so forth, but then you do not know how to apply those teachings within yourself to discipline the mind, and you are not skilled at the practice or applying the teaching in practice. Therefore, it is important to study all these texts, but not just leaving it at that, but try to understand the different teachings, their purpose and so forth, and combine them together for practice. And then the next verse, verse number 5, shows that of the mental basis for practicing the Dharma. So you have to have compassion And then when you go further and experience this further, you come to a point where you will have the resolve to lead others out of suffering, this special kind of extraordinary resolve. Now, when you look at the suffering of others, what suffering is, you have to know. So, within the in the case of suffering, we're not just talking here about that of the suffering of suffering or the obvious painful experiences. Panchen Solomon again has said that even the animals are aware of this kind of suffering, the painful experiences which are not, which do not desired by anybody, and they also wish to be out of suffering. I have a cat. When it's hot in the summer, he would touch his belly on the floor, which is cool, and therefore he knows that it is pleasant to touch his belly on the cool floor, and he sits lies in the shade. And then when it's rainy, it's nowhere to be seen, but somewhere inside, is lost somewhere inside the rooms. And then when the sun shines, then he comes out. And therefore, even animals do not want suffering, this kind of suffering, the painful experiences. And then, with regard to the second type of suffering, which is called the changeable sufferings, such as the pleasant experiences that we go through, we have changing into suffering. For Singaporeans, I usually say that when you have quite a lot of money, you may buy a good car, television, and when the car is brand new, you would even not allow a bee to land on it, and after few months, the excitement is over, and then you may want another new brand of car. So in the beginning, what you find really exciting, a car, so for example, brand new car, your excitement wanes in time, in after maybe a few weeks or months. So this shows that what is beautiful or good in the beginning turns out to be ugly, and therefore what is impure or contaminated uh, in terms of pleasurable experiences, they turn into unpleasurable ones. So this shows that of the changeable suffering. And this kind of suffering, even the non-Buddhist traditions, practitioners who develop or cultivate those of the four types of concentration, which leads you to the concentration realms, and also the four formless realms and so forth. Uh, so they find them to be unpleasant, undesirable. So the pleasant experiences within these the desire realm are seen to be undesirable by such persons or such practitioners who develop these experiences of concentration, which would lead them to that of the four concentration realms and four formless realms. But the suffering that we are talking about in the context of the Buddhist practice is what is known as the pervasive conditioning existential suffering. And so, and therefore, Panchen Lobsang Shögen says, the this kind of psychophysical aggregates which has come about through ignorance, delusions, and karma, is something which is seen as suffering by by the practitioner of Buddhism who wishes to attain liberation. So someone who has reflected on the hundreds of different kinds of sufferings of samsara, the cycle of existence, and have generated this wish to go out of such an existential suffering. Uh, what happens to us usually is what is suffering and actually is by seeing them to be rather pleasurable, we go after them, and therefore you have to, in order to generate compassion, you you have to think about or reflect on that of the suffering, contemplate suffering thoroughly. And in order to do that, you have to think about the overcoming that of attachment to this life, pleasures of this life and the next lives. And so through this you develop that of the thought of renunciation, or the thought which the desire to definitely go out of suffering. And with having done that, then you go into that of cultivating compassion and wishing others to be out of suffering, and then you develop it further and further to the point where you develop this extraordinary resolve to take the responsibility of freeing others out of suffering. And this also has to be based on that of the love or loving kindness, and based on that the compassion arises, and then it's extraordinary resolve, and then bodhicitta will come. So for us, of course, it's very difficult to have virtuous states of mind, and it's also very difficult for us to see the non-virtuous states of mind as being non-virtuous. And therefore, it becomes very difficult for us to understand, to become aware of the negative thoughts and emotions, the afflictive emotions, and to be aware that they are actually negative emotions. Whereas if you develop this understanding of emptiness, then you'll be able to see all these things, that negative thoughts and emotions are negative. And therefore, verse number 6 says, hence virtue is perpetually feeble. The great strength of immorality being extremely intense. Since it's very difficult for us to have the experience of bodhicitta, which has to come through according to one tradition, what is known as the 7-point cause and effect method. We have to learn them, and even when people are engaged in virtuous practices, like religious practices, sometimes we rather become complacent about them, and even in doing some prayers, people would just do it without much enthusiasm. Of course, you have to have the enthusiasm, interest in doing these practices and the prayers and so forth. It's very difficult to have some kind of abrupt experience or sudden experience of high realizations. It will not come just like that. So the virtuous states of mind will not come about automatically. We have to put effort in them. And therefore it says, and virtue is perpetually feeble, the strength of immorality, or being extremely intense. So because we are beset with the negative thoughts and emotions, we are bound to create negative karmas. Very powerful, the negative emotions give rise to powerful karmic actions. So we have to put huge effort in cultivating these prerequisites for, in our mind for that of the bodhicitta. So for someone like us who are very feeble in merit and who have very powerful negative states of mind, negative action, maybe this analogy may not be befitting, but when we talk about the weapons, of course, they are very bad in destroying things. Whereas many bullets, maybe something which can be destroyed with one huge bomb, nuclear bomb, instead of hundreds and thousands or millions of bullets. So in the similar way, in case of bodhicitta, first of all, try to understand what bodhicitta is, its nature. As the Gadamba masters usually say, once you have the experience of true bodhicitta within yourself, that itself is the source of all benefit, accumulating or collecting merit, gaining merit, and overcoming all the clearing the negativities. And so, of course, we can do virtuous actions with our body, speech, and mind, but others virtuous actions may not be as powerful as bodhicitta, which is said to lead you to higher rebirths, as well as cut the root of, overcome those of the source or the cause of lower rebirths, and lead you to the state of immortality or Buddhahood. So abstaining from killing, merely fearing the law, is not as powerful as abstaining from it by knowing that one would have negative karma by doing that. But here you may abstain from killing because you think, oh, this is bad for me. But instead of thinking in that way, if you cherish the life of the other person, the other animal or person whom you are going to kill, and then abstain from killing, that is more powerful. And similarly with lying, how can I deceive others? Because I don't like others deceiving me. So you can do practice of abstaining from the non-virtuous actions, 10 non-virtuous actions, with yourself as the reason, and as well as thinking about others, using others as the reason for abstaining from them. So bodhicitta is something which not only helps you to overcome the that of overcoming the negative actions, but it can even lead you to that of Buddhahood. So even if you may be doing the same kind of practice, but if you do it with the motivation of bodhicitta, that action will be, the positive action will be a cause for Buddhahood. Whereas if you do it merely with selfish attitude, then it's not so powerful like bodhicitta. And with bodhicitta, it is said that you can achieve Buddhahood easily and lead you to that state of deathlessness. And except for fully awakening mind, by what other virtue will it be overcome? So this is about bodhicitta. So because with bodhicitta you're mentally happy and peaceful, you will physically be healthy. And therefore, with the help of this, then you can even turn the obstacles into favorable conditions for your practice. So when you have, for example, suffering, someone with an experience of bodhicitta will think that with this suffering that I'm experiencing, may all the sufferings of others be overcome, may the ocean of suffering of others dry up. And when I am happy, I dedicate, you think of dedicating whatever experience you generate from that for the benefit of others. And so whether you are in a happy or unhappy state, both can be a favorable condition for you. For collecting merit and or overcoming negative vitties. Zapeti Rinpoche has said, I will not be happy when I'll not be joyous when I'm happy, because that brings more pride. Whereas if I'm suffering, then it helps in cleansing the negativities. Whereas it is opposite for us. If we want happy, we want to be joyous and happy, praised by others and fame and so forth. So we want the eight worldly, we run after the eight worldly concerns. So if you can think carefully, these are really these different circumstances even can be turned into favorable conditions, like a blessing in disguise. So I usually tell people, when you are undergoing a disastrous experience, then that can even help in inspiring you further with courage and confidence. So of course, if you are happy, and it's good, but even when what would others consider to be really unbearable, these unpleasant, even such an experience, if you find them to be rather bearable, then that would be helpful to you. And so bodhicitta can help in progressing further on the path more swiftly. And finally, help in overcoming both the delusions and their imprints from our mind, and lead us to that state of enlightenment or Buddhahood. And therefore, if you understand what bodhicitta is, and then acquaint your mind with it, and then gain some kind of confidence in it, it would be like what Master Shantideva is teaching later. And then your so whatever you do will be a cause for happiness, and certain action which for others, if they commit them, maybe would be negative, but with the help of bodhicitta, if it can be, it can be turned into positive ones. So it's really marvelous, and bodhicitta is the panacea for 100 different sicknesses. So verse number 7. So with regard to the benefits of bodhicitta, you can also read Kondon Lama Rinpoche's text on bodhicitta, which is translated into English by Gareth Sparham. So whatever you desire, there's no other better factor for achieving them than that of bodhicitta. So verse number 7 says it will in line 4 it says will quickly attain the supreme state of bliss. So which refers to the supreme state of bliss, refers to the highest enlightenment, Buddhahood, for which of course we should also attain that of a higher rebirth, and then progress higher and higher from there spiritually. And then verse number 8, those who wish to destroy the many sorrows of their conditioned existence, or the suffering or sorrow in the future, those who wish all beings to experience a multitude of joys, and those who wish to experience much happiness should never forsake the awakening mind or bodhicitta. Verse number 9, the moment an awakening mind arises in those fettered and weak in the jail of cyclic existence, they will be named a child of the Sugatas and will be revered by both humans and gods of the world. So this bodhicitta, the moment you experience the genuine bodhicitta within yourself, from that time onwards, that person becomes someone worthy of veneration by humans and gods in the world. It is like the supreme gold making elixir, for it transforms the unclean body we have taken into the priceless jewel of Buddha form. Therefore firmly seize this awakening mind. So just as certain iron can be turned into gold, like 1,000 kilos or so of iron can be turned into gold by this gold-making elixir, this human body that we have now, which may be a vessel of suffering and a source of suffering, if it can be turned into the priceless jewel of Buddha form, then it's amazing. It shows that. And this gold medal elixir is the awakening mind. Verse number 11, since the limitless mind of the sole guide of the world has upon thorough investigation seen its preciousness, all beings wishing to be free from worldly abodes should firmly take hold of this precious awakening mind. So the sole guide of the world refers to the Buddha, and also his followers of the Bodhisattvas, and then also the great masters like Nagarjuna and his spiritual son Aryadeva and Asanka and Vasubandhu and so forth. So we have the writings of all these great masters. Even today, they are like a lamp for us to dispel the darkness of our ignorance and showing us the right path. And so the Buddha, the sole guide of the world, who's is the Bodhisattva, rooted in Bodhisattva, and are completely resolved to help others out of suffering. Says has upon thorough investigation seen its preciousness, and therefore all beings wishing to be free from the worldly abodes should firmly take hold of this precious awakening mind. So you have to first generate the mind or the bodhicitta, and then hold it firmly without causing any decline to it. So wishing to be free from the worldly abodes means not allowing you to be overwhelmed by those of the negative thoughts and emotions, overpowered by those of karma and delusions, which are further rooted in those of the conceiving a true existence of phenomena. So someone who wishes to be free from such an existence with the understanding of emptiness combined with that of the bodhicitta, then the practice of wisdom becomes a complete practice. All other virtues are like plantain tree, for after bearing fruit, they simply perish. Yet the perennial tree of the awakening mind unceasingly bears fruit and thereby flourishes without end. So to attaining a higher rebirth as humans or gods are the fruits of our positive actions in the past. So these kind of and then when you create causes for mere liberation, arhatship, and once you attain that goal, that's the end of that those positive actions. And so, whereas the merit of bodhicitta cannot wane forever, and therefore it says all other virtues are like plantain tree. After bearing fruit, they simply perish. Whereas the merits gained through awakening mind, bodhicitta, can increase further and further, year by year, and so forth. Like entrusting myself to a brave man when greatly afraid, by entrusting myself to this awakening mind, I shall be swiftly liberated. At this stage, our mind is full of negative thoughts and emotions, and we are engaged in negative actions. That's what we do. Whereas if you take refuge, if you can take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha with the motivation of bodhicitta, then that kind of virtuous action would be very powerful. Verse number 14. So if we could reflect on bodhicitta each day, every day, and then try to cultivate it in sessions, sitting in meditation sessions, and with such a motivation, even if you may spend a very little time in doing certain practices, you will be able to overcome the huge amount of negative vitties, negative actions. Such a bodhicitta which is so powerful and very has lots of great qualities. Its unfathomable advantages are taught to the disciple Sudhana by the wise Lord Maitreya. In Abhisamaya Alamkara, bodhicitta is described in terms of the 22 types or categories. And then bodhicitta is also divided or categorized into the conventional and ultimate, which are division by name only. But here, then there is a division into bodhicitta, into the aspiring and engaging bodhicitta. So here, in brief, it says, verse number 15, the awakening mind should be understood to be of two types: the mind that aspires to awaken and the mind that ventures to do so. So the mind that ventures to do so is not only staying at the aspirational level, but wish level, but then actually engaging in the practices that leads one to the Buddhahood. So what's the distinction between these two is shown by the analogy next in the next verse. As is understood by the distinction between aspiring to go and actually going. So while you have the wish, and then once you have the wish, and then you actually go to a certain place, on the way you may take rest, but then you're still in the process of going to that destination. So the wise understand in turn the distinction between these two. So the mere wish or the thought or desire to achieve enlightenment or Buddhahood is the aspiring bodhicitta, whereas by on top of that, if you take vow and then actually vow to engage in the Bodhisattva practices and actually enter into the practices yourself, then that's bodhicitta is called venturing bodhicitta. So of these two types of bodhicitta, the engaging bodhicitta is not merely staying at the wish level, but actually you have decided to engage in the practice. And therefore it is more powerful than the aspiring bodhicitta. And verse number 18 says, and for those who have perfectly seized this mind with the thought never to turn away from totally liberating the infinite forms of life from that time hence, even while sleep. From that time hence, even while asleep or unconcerned, our force of to liberate all sentient beings. So even while asleep or unconcerned, a force of merit equal to the sky will perpetually ensue. So you have vowed to engage in the practices, and having done that, even in sleep, in dream, you may dream about bodhicitta, and as soon as you wake up from sleep, you will be able to remind bodhicitta. So first, so from the time you take bodhisattva vows, the force of merit is equal to the sky will perpetually ensue, it says. So with regards to So there are these four principles of analyzing things, or four reasonings, which are called the principle of relation or relativity, and then the principle of functionality of things. So these four different principles are always applied in our life, of course. When you look at things, you can see what they can function. And then, with regard to the principle of relation, we can talk about the relationship between cause and effect. This is even applied in science, like medical science. This principle is used. And then there is the principle of nature, which is that because of certain kind of nature of things, it has certain effects. So on the basis of the nature of things, they have different functions. And therefore, we can have the logical conclusions derived from that. And therefore, the principle of logical argument comes. So, verse number 20. So what is said in the sutra requested by Subahu is meant for those disciples who are not yet certain which lineage or spiritual lineage they belong to, Mahayana, Hinayana. Verse number 21. So, if even a thought to relieve living creatures of merely a headache is a beneficent intention endowed with infinite goodness, then what need is there to mention, to the wish to dispel their inconceivable misery, wishing every single one of them to realize boundless good qualities. So these can be shown through, illustrated through certain accounts that are given in the text as well. And the Nagarjuna has said that if the merit of bodhisattva were to have some physical form, it will not be even the space will not be enough for that. Do even the fathers and mothers have such benevolent intention as this? Do the gods and sages? Does even Brahma have it? If those beings have never before even dreamt of such an attitude for their own sake, how would it ever arise for the sake of others? So in order to have bodhicitta, one should first have the thought of renunciation, the thought definitely to emerge from samsara, but we do not have even that. So this intention to benefit all being, which does not arise in others, even for their own sake, is an extraordinary jewel of the mind, and its birth is an unprecedented wonder. So for us, this intention to become a Buddha for the benefit of sentient beings does not happen. We may say prayers, but it doesn't. This kind of thought doesn't happen to us automatically. So something that has not even occurred to us. How can verse number 26. With regard to the wisdom realizing emptiness, for example, from the point of view of Chittamatra philosophy, saying that things do not have any intrinsic nature is said to be a nihilistic view. Asanga has mentioned that. Of course, Asanga has also written a commentary on Mahayana Uttaratantra, where he explains emptiness precisely as it is, from the point of view of Madhyamaka philosophical view. But in his text on Chittamatra, he has written otherwise. So nobody will object to the fact that cherishing others is more precious than cherishing oneself. Of course, people will say, this is not possible to do, but nobody can object to the value of this self-cherishing, cherishing others. If verse number 27, as it was said earlier, even the beneficial thought of aspiring bodhicitta has great benefit, great merit, then what needs to mention striving to make all beings without exception happy? All sentient beings do not want suffering but want happiness. And therefore, if you ask, we do not need to have the resolve to, the courageous resolve to help others out of suffering. And therefore, the answer here is, although wishing to be rid of misery, they run towards misery itself. So nearly 7 billion human beings on this earth all want happiness and not suffering. But because of not knowing what brings suffering, they run after suffering. Although wishing to have happiness, like an enemy, they ignorantly destroy it. So people kind of consider or regard it silly to engage in practices that bring happiness for others. So in the recent events, from the recent events in North Africa, shows this very clearly, that if you think only of one's own power and money, then people will not actually respect you. Whereas on the other hand, you have examples like Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela and so forth, who have dedicated themselves to help others. And people are happy for them. So even in one's own life, you can see the benefit of thinking of benefiting others. And whereas the thought only thinking about money and power and so forth will not bring real happiness. So those who are amidst suffering are same like us, not wanting suffering but wanting happiness. For those who are deprived of happiness, are burdened with many sorrows, it satisfies them with all joys, dispels all suffering. So those who are deprived of happiness and burdened with many different types of sorrows or sufferings, and the Bodhisattva satisfies them with all joys, meaning it can lead them to have higher rebirth and dispel all suffering. And clear away confusion. Where is there a comparable virtue? Where is there even such a friend? Where is there merit similar to this? If whoever repays a kind deed is worthy of some praise, then what need to mention the bodhisattvas who do good without it being asked for them? So if something that is considered to be good, even if the person was looking for some kind of a reward, then without any distinction between who are actually harming them or who are doing them good, but concerned with their well-being equally, the world honors as virtuous one who sometimes gives a little plain food disrespectfully to a few beings, which satisfies them for only half a day. So this shows giving foods while disrespecting the beggars. You may give some food to them, so without, and then you just become like proud, saying that, oh, I have given food to these beggars and so forth. So you look down upon those beggars and give food, but even such deed is considered the world honors. What need be said then of one who eternally bestows the peerless bliss of the Sugatas upon limitless numbers of sentient beings, thereby fulfilling all their hopes? So the bodhicitta, which leads to one to have higher rebirths, and then finally that of the peerless bliss of the Sugatas, or Buddhahood, upon limitless number of beings, thereby fulfilling all their hopes. Verse number 34. So someone who only thinks of benefiting others. The Buddha has said that whoever bears a harmful thought against a benevolent, such as benefactors such as a bodhisattva, will remain in hell for many eons as they were harmful thoughts. Verse number 35. However, if a virtuous attitude should arise in that regard, its fruits will multiply far more than that. So one is able to, a bodhisattva is able to see the short-term and long-term goals and benefits and merits of their practice. And therefore, whatever misfortune they may come across, these misfortunes will not become cause for them to create negative actions, but instead their virtues naturally increase. I bow down to the body of those in whom the sacred precious mind is born. I seek refuge in that source of joy who brings happiness even to those who bring them harm. So because of the courage of the bodhisattvas and the power of their truth, and what would otherwise become a cause for suffering and the cyclic existence will can be turned into positive ones. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who have accumulated so much merit over countless eons, if someone were to even see an image of such a Buddha with an agitated mind, with hatred, mind full of hatred, even in such cases, the image can help the person to overcome the negativities. So this completes the first chapter of Bodhisattva Avatara, which is the benefit of bodhicitta. So I'll stop here for today. Third chapter shows that of accepting bodhicitta or embracing it. And as a preliminary to that, then you have the 7 limb practice, which is shown in the second chapter, which is that of the chapter on confession. So these first 3 chapters are for cultivating bodhicitta where it has not yet arisen. And we have this prayer, may the precious mind jewel of bodhicitta arise, or in those it has not yet grown, and may it grow further without decline. And therefore, the first 3 chapters shows how to cultivate bodhicitta where it has not yet arisen, and then the next 3 chapters show how to develop it further and further. And then the 10th chapter shows that of the dedication. And with regard to the perfection of giving, practice of giving, there is no separate chapter, but it is found everywhere in the text, and particularly in the 10th chapter. And then the other chapters also deal with those of the morality, the morality, patience, joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom. So with regard to T, or guided instructions, perhaps this teaching is like explanatory guidance teaching, but perhaps you may also consider this to be an experiential commentary or guided teaching. I received a teaching on Bodhisattva Charyavatara in 1967, and so I have quite a good familiarity with this text, and therefore whatever I have taught, this chapter 1, for example, today I've taught, so you can go over it and reflect on the meaning, and if you do that, then it will become like an explanatory, experiential explanation of the text. If you don't want to receive explanatory guided teaching of this text, then you may just leave the text aside and drink some alcohol and take rest. But if you do feel inspired to receive explanatory commentary on this text, then go over the text once and reflect on the meanings. And then so those of the Chinese people, if of course the communist Chinese ask you what you have heard from Dalai Lama, you may say that of course he has taught something, but I have not really understood, and like that.